Welcome. Today, we're going to tackle one of the most difficult topics in the study of deviance, interpersonal violence. Our goal here is to move past the sensational media stories to really understand this not as a bunch of random horrifying acts, but as a structured social phenomenon that we can actually analyze. So, let's get into it.
Right off the bat, you might be wondering, why approach a topic that brings up so much emotion with such, analytical distance? And that's a fair question. The reason is really fundamental to what we're trying to do. If we want to genuinely understand why this violence happens, we have to step back from the horror and look for the patterns, the social conditions, and the structures underneath. Our purpose isn't to sensationalize, it's to analyze.
All right, first things first, let's get our key definitions straight. From a sociological point of view, interpersonal violence doesn't just come out of nowhere. It actually grows out of social interactions. It happens when a situation, like an argument or a dispute, gets defined by the people in it in a way that seems to call for a violent response. And here's the crucial part. This most often happens not between strangers, but between people who actually know each other. And this leads us to a core idea in sociology. The popular view, what you see on the news, often frames extreme violence as totally random and unpredictable. But sociology shows us it's actually structured. You see, deviance, even at its most extreme, is connected to the basic features of social life. Things like age, gender, social class. It follows patterns.
So, to really understand this idea of structured deviance, we're going to use an extreme and very rare example, serial homicide. We're going to look at it through a framework that sociologists call the criminal career. Now, this isn't about a job in the way we usually think of it, but it's a really powerful way to understand how commitment and progression work in deviance.
So what exactly do we mean by a criminal career? Well, in sociology, it refers to an individual's deep and ongoing commitment to crime. We're not talking about a single act. We're talking about a life that becomes organized around criminal activities, where deviance becomes a central piece of a person's identity and their social role. You can think of this as being built on three main pillars. First, there's an identification with crime, where the person starts to see themselves as a criminal. Second, there's a deep commitment to playing that role. And third, you see a clear progression over time, where they develop more complex techniques and more sophisticated attitudes about what they're doing. Okay, now this is a really critical distinction. Most violent crime is situational. It's committed by what sociologists call non-career deviance. They don't identify with crime in this deep, ongoing way. Serial homicide, however, is different. It's that rare exception that fits this career model almost perfectly, which is why it gives us such a clear, if disturbing, case study. Sociologist Randall Collins actually identified a four-stage path that these individuals often follow. It starts with brutalization, which means they've either been a victim of or have witnessed severe violence. This leads to belligerency, a conscious choice to use violence themselves down the road. After that come the violent performances, the actual acts of hurting others, which is almost like practice. And this all leads to virulency, a key stage where a violent identity is adopted and then reinforced by how others react, cementing it as their social role.
This quote from an offender's journal is, well, it's chilling, but you can see the career model in action. Notice the planning, the specific time, the focus on technique, headshots, headshots, headshots. This is a world away from a sudden, impulsive act of rage. This is the language of progression, of commitment to a craft, no matter how horrific that craft is.
So, if we're talking about a career path, it makes sense that we'd start to see patterns, right? Because this behavior is learned and it's refined, it's not random, it's structured, and we can analyze that structure by looking at the offender, their choice of victim, and the details of the offense itself. And what's really striking is how consistent these patterns are. We often see specific demographic profiles for offenders. We see that victim selection isn't random at all. It's often highly specific, targeting strangers from particular groups, frequently those who are marginalized. And the offense characteristics, they show repetition and refinement over time. It's the very opposite of chaos. Now, in analyzing these patterns, it's crucial to distinguish between two key ideas. The first is the modus operandi, or MO. Think of this as the practical how of the crime, the methods they use. The MO can change and evolve as the offender learns. But the signature, that's the psychological why. It's an act that isn't needed to commit the crime, but it fulfills some deep emotional need for the offender, and that tends to stay the same. Well, once you start recognizing these patterns in the MO and the signature, the next logical step for institutions like law enforcement is to try and use them. This is where profiling comes in. It's an attempt to use this kind of analysis to narrow down suspects and exert a form of social control.
And this brings us to a really, really important question. If we can see these patterns and these developmental paths so clearly, does that mean we can actually predict who is going to become a violent offender?
The answer is an emphatic no. And this is a vital takeaway from our session today. Sociological analysis is probabilistic, not predictive. It can identify risk factors and patterns that show up across a group. It can tell us that certain experiences increase the likelihood of violence, but it can never, ever predict with certainty what any single individual is going to do.
All right, so we've used this extreme case to understand a sociological framework. Now we need to zoom out a bit and talk about the huge gap between the reality of this type of crime and how we perceive it as a culture.
Let's just start with the hard data. Statistically, serial homicide is incredibly rare. We're talking about just 1 to 2% of all murders in the US each year. The vast majority of homicides are committed by non-career offenders, usually during disputes between people who know each other.
But despite how rare it is, the media creates a completely different picture. Sensationalism focuses on the rituals, which builds up this almost mythic status. This can lead to a bizarre kind of celebrity status for offenders. And today, this gets amplified in online subcultures and fandoms that discuss these cases almost like it's dark entertainment, totally disconnected from the real human cost.
And this has a profound social cost. This cultural fascination creates myths around the killer. But in doing that, it tragically pushes the reality of the victims into the background. Their lives, their suffering, and their dignity all get lost in the shadow of the perpetrator's infamy.
So, what's the big takeaway here? After applying this sociological lens to such a disturbing topic, what should we remember? Well, it really all comes back to where we started. The importance of maintaining that analytical distance so we can achieve a real understanding. Let's quickly recap what we've learned. First, even the most extreme deviance isn't random. It's structured and it's patterned. Second, we've seen how the idea of a career deviance is built on identification, commitment, and progression. Third, this analytical approach helps us see past the sensational media myths to the sociological reality. And finally, and this is the most important point, our focus must always stay on systematic analysis that puts the dignity and the reality of the victims first. In our next explainer, we're going to keep using these same powerful frameworks. We'll be shifting our focus away from violence to explore the structured patterns and career dynamics of nonviolent crime. And that concludes our look at the sociological analysis of interpersonal violence. I hope this structured lens has given you a new way to think about this difficult subject. Thanks for joining me.